I think distinctly that we need to think about and really wrap our minds around when it comes to the playoff rankings as they are given to us currently. So here's what the committee gave to us. Georgia is number 1, Michigan's number 2, TCU is number 3, and USC is number 4. I didn't have a great deal to argue with there. I guess you could argue Michigan at number 1, but listen, Georgia is 30-1 in their last 31 games. That's the best record in college football. They're the defending national champion, so I don't have a problem with them being number 1 at all. Now, what we thought was going to be interesting is what was happening at 5 and 6, and Ohio State's going to edge out Alabama, and so Ohio State is 5 and Alabama is 6. Now, if you really wanted to get into the nitty-gritty, 2 teams I saw play each other. They have the exact same record. One beat the other, and yet the committee is telling me that the team that lost that game is 6 and the other team is 7. Tennessee should probably be 6, but listen, whatever. I mean, it's Bama, and they're going to get the brand bias pretty much in every single case as long as Nick Saban is still there. Let's get into the 3 points that I want to get into. So those top 3 teams right now in those playoff rankings are all undefeated: Georgia, Michigan, and TCU. And I think that all of those teams should remain in the playoff and in playoff position, even if they were to lose this week in conference championship game weekend. When you look at their resumes, there's really no way that they could lose an argument against an Ohio State or specifically an Alabama. When you start going through it, it's like, well, Georgia's got great wins, and they've obviously got the pedigree, and they're 12-0 through an SEC regular season. So they're going to go regardless. I think that we all know that. Then you get to Michigan, and it's like, well, Michigan's going to win an argument over Ohio State because we just saw that game play out. Plus, Michigan's got 12 wins. Bama's only got 10. Now Michigan has a win over Ohio State in the shoe. The best win Bama has is Texas. So Michigan would win an argument in that regard, which brings us to TCU. I think TCU actually wins an argument even if they lose over both of these other teams. Because remember, in the event they lose, it's to Kansas State this week in the Big 12 championship game. Kansas State would then be firmly in the top 10. Which means that TCU also has a win over a top 10 team because they beat Kansas State earlier in the season. They also have a win over Texas, which is Bama's best win. So you start to play this out. They've got the 12 wins. Ohio State only has 11 wins. You start to play it out, and you quickly start to realize those 3 teams should be in regardless of outcome this weekend. So that lends us to, well, how does Bama get in then? What's the path for Bama? If there's not 2 spots that are potentially coming available, even if everybody loses, then how does Bama actually sneak into the playoff? They don't. I think Bama is out, and I think that that's very clear. They're not going over Georgia. That's pretty clear. They're not going over Michigan. That's pretty clear. And if you want to create the argument against TCU, I just outlined a little bit of it right there. TCU would have a win over Kansas State under their belt. That's a better win, any win, than Alabama has. By the way, TCU's strength of record and strength of schedule is pretty darn good when you actually look at the resume. And then you start to get to the point where you look at the best win Alabama has, and that's Texas on the road in Austin. Guess who also has a win against Texas on the road in Austin? TCU. And TCU did it in a more dominant fashion than Bama did it, when Bama was actually outplayed and kind of got lucky late in order to win that game. So TCU is going to win that argument, which means Bama's out. I don't think there's any path whatsoever that Alabama can make the college football playoff, which brings us to USC and Ohio State. So who would win in an argument? Let's just say Utah were to win the Pac-12 championship, and now we're going to have an argument between USC and Ohio State. Well, see, in that sense, I think Ohio State might actually win the argument. One, because they've got a top 10 win. That happened on the road at Penn State. The best team that USC would have played all year would be Utah. They would have lost to that Utah team now twice. That's pretty debilitating when you actually look at it. So I think Ohio State would actually go to the playoff if USC were to lose, which means who's Georgia rooting for? If you're Georgia on the eve of your SEC championship game and you start looking at this and you're like, well, who would we rather play? Is it USC or is it Ohio State? That becomes a fascinating question. In one regard, you've got Caleb Williams, who's probably about to win the Heisman Trophy and should, because he's playing as well as anybody I've seen in a long time. He's playing with a supreme confidence, bordering on arrogance out there. He just knows he's going to be successful. This is a team that creates takeaways. They seem to be on a roll. Meanwhile, Ohio State, the last time we saw them, they were getting, 28 put on them in the second half of that game? Like, they didn't look that great. So who would Georgia rather face? Well, isn't it actually pretty clearly USC? Let's not fall victim of recency bias of seeing that Ohio State, who won every game prior to Michigan by double digits, is actually a roster that would compete with Georgia to a much better degree than the roster that USC has. USC might be playing up right now because of their quarterback, but if you actually look at what the lines would be in those semifinal games, Georgia would be favored by somewhere around 13.5 over USC and only 5 over Ohio State. So Georgia and Georgia fans, if you're watching that game on Friday night, and I know you will be on Fox, Brock, you've got the call, Jason Benetti as well with Allison Williams, I think you're rooting for the Trojans because I think you would rather see USC. Even though you have to see Caleb Williams, that's a roster that you clearly have an advantage over rather than the Ohio State Buckeyes. Okay, that'll do it for this segment. When we come back on Breaking the Huddle, we're going to get into much more, including an interview with Jeff Brohm. All right, welcome back to the show, and really pleased right now to be joined by the head coach of the Big Ten West champion, Purdue Boilermakers. Jeff Brohm joins the program right now. Coach, congratulations, man.
Thank you. We're looking forward to it. We're excited. Our team is, and I'm sure our fans are. So a great opportunity this week to play a tremendous football team on Saturday night.
You guys have been building towards this. You came to town, what was it, 6 years ago, and you've had some big wins in your tenure as the Purdue head coach, but this is the first time you get to, hang one of those trophies up as division champions and now play for a bigger one in a conference title. Can you take me into just like the overall growth and how proud you are of this program that you've gotten to this point?
Well, it is really rewarding. We came in here with the goal to help these young men achieve their goals and win some football games and bring some excitement back to the fan base and try to compete against the top team, especially in our conference. And I think every year we've been able to make some strides. And it's always going to be a challenge. There's really good football played in the Big Ten every year. There's some dominant teams year in and year out. But I think we've gradually gotten better. I think we can compete on a weekly basis and be in the ball game and have a chance to possibly win it if we do a lot of things right. I think our fan base appreciates a hardworking blue-collar team that's going to give it everything they have and take some chances and risk and find a way to win if we can. And it's just been an exciting run. So I think when you're coaching guys that have a chip on their shoulder, that are out to prove themselves and prove to people that they can play football at a high level, those guys are a lot of fun to coach. Yeah,
and you have a lot of them, by the way. Guys that, you've got some quality recruits and some walk-ons. And I mean, your mixture of guys that contribute on this team is actually quite astonishing when you just look at the makeup. For instance, you got a quarterback in Aiden O'Connell who walked in basically with you as a walk-on. And you and I have talked about, he was what, like 10th string, I mean, like he was at the bottom of that barrel, but just continued to keep working. You got a transfer wide receiver in Charlie Jones. You got a walk-on running back in Devin Mockabee. You got a really good player at tight end in Payne Durham. You kind of have it all, right, in terms of how these guys matriculated themselves, if that's a word, I think it is, to Purdue.
Well, it is kind of a melting pot of a lot of different backgrounds. And just like you said, a lot of our big-time playmakers on our team right now started at the bottom. Even Payne Durham, one of our good tight ends, was a lacrosse player, played 1 year of football. Charlie Jones started at Buffalo, then walked on at Iowa, then still wanted more and wanted to showcase his receiving skills. So luckily we got him here. Aiden O'Connell, our running back, Devin Mockabee, still is a walk-on, came in as a walk-on, and he's been producing. And then you got some other guys that compete as well, but it's just a really good mix of guys. I think they understand that we got work to do every week. Even in the off season, we got to make corrections during the season. We might take a couple punches to the chin or in the gut and knock us over, but we got to get back up. And it's just a lot of fun. I think our coaches enjoy coaching and competing against top teams. Our fans love watching us play the very best. And without question, this week against Michigan, we will be really tested against, in my opinion, the best team in the country.
Yeah, and I'll ask you about Michigan in a moment, but another broad, kind of question about, in particular, the transfer portal, Coach. I actually see it evening out college football, and the evidence of that is a guy like Charlie, right? Like what you were able to do in the portal. Here's a guy that was, like you said, Buffalo, walked on at Iowa. Now he's here for you at Purdue. He might win the triple crown of receiving in the Big Ten. Right now he leads in catches. He leads in yards. He's tied with Marvin Harrison Jr. for touchdown catches. The impact of the transfer portal on a program like yours and what it's meant this season.
Well, it does change things every year. And you not only have to recruit young high school recruits, but yes, you got to adjust your roster every year. And there's always guys that, feel like they are not getting the proper opportunity somewhere and want a chance to go compete. And you've got to figure out a way to recruit those guys that still have the hunger, that still have the work ethic, that are willing to put it in and don't just think they've kind of been, screwed over by the other team. So it's kind of a, it's a challenge to make sure you get it right. We've definitely hit on some and we've missed on a few others, but they're all good kids. And you just got to, do your best and understand what your weaknesses are at the end of each year, evaluate it. It's different every year, and then go try to, improve the roster. But yes, it's going to constantly be changing every year. And you got to make sure that you're going to do your part to help your roster get better.
You've said that Michigan line to me now twice this week. One on our production Zoom, you called Michigan the best team in the country, and here again you call Michigan the best team in the country. So what is it going to take for you guys to beat Michigan and capture your first Big Ten title since 2000?
Well, you can tell they're playing with a lot of confidence. They're very talented, they're well coached. There's not any weaknesses. A lot of strength up front seven on defense, the O-line on offense. Their linebackers play downhill, and they're big and physical. The DBs are really good. They don't give up big plays. They're very sound on an NFL-style defense. On offense, the running game is off the charts. Now they got a dynamic quarterback that makes a ton of plays. So that's tough to overcome. So what you're going to have to do is you're just going to come in, and sometimes against those type of teams, you have to figure out a way to beat them at their own game, which means, you know what, we're going to have to play as hard as we can and try to be as physical as we can. We're going to have to, make more plays, take a few more chances. We're going to have to figure out a way to get turnovers. We're going to have to figure out a way to somehow get them on their heels if it's possible. But really getting the game to the second half with a close ball game is going to be critical. The more we can gain confidence will help us. But this is a challenge. But you know what? This is why these guys come to Purdue to get an opportunity to once in a lifetime play in these games. And I know our guys are looking forward to it.
Well, you've got the history, knocking teams off. In 2018, you beat Ohio State. Last year, Iowa and Michigan State, all of those were top 5 wins. Beat Tennessee, and that was a good Tennessee team in the bowl game that you beat in Nashville. And you did it without David Bell, by the way, your best wide receiver. But in every one of those games, you look back, there was a wide receiver for you guys that went off. David Bell, both of those matchups last year. And then against Tennessee, it was Brock Thompson, who, by the way, hasn't even been available to you this year. Rondell Moore in that Ohio State game in 2018. How important is Charlie Jones in the passing game to really go out there and create another one of these upsets that you guys have become known for?
Well, it's going to be critical. I think, all of our guys play hard and they do a good job and they play a role, but it is important that your best players touch the ball and your best players get an opportunity to make plays. And that's just a smart thing of coaching that you got to figure out a way to do. And it's not always easy, but you got to make sure it happens. And we want to, do our part to get it to Charlie and make sure that we figure out ways to get a matchup where he has a chance. And our tight end has made some plays for us. Our running back's done a really good job and runs, fearless. And our quarterback, if you can give him a little bit of time and get guys open for him quick, he'll deliver the ball accurately. And our defense has played really well this year for the most part, other than a few times here and there. So I just think that, that's football, getting the ball in your playmakers' hands and cutting it loose, being aggressive, having some fun with it, and going down to really right down the street from us and playing in front of a great audience. So we're looking forward to that.
I was going to say, you guys are, this is kind of like a pseudo home game for the Boilermakers, and we'll see how that stadium pans out. I do got to say, you and I had a conversation last year. All of these championship games, I always kind of call around the conference to the coaches that played each of the teams and we had a great conversation. You were so helpful a year ago, and you and I both said it earlier this week. These conversations are a lot more fun, right, when you're actually playing in the game. So congratulations again, my friend.
Okay, I appreciate it. Keep up the great work. Thank you.
You got it. All right, there he goes. Jeff Brohm, head coach of the Purdue Boilermakers. They take on Michigan Saturday night in the Big Ten championship game. Let's finish things off here when we come back here on Breaking the Huddle. All right, let's go out and get some questions from Fansville here, and I want to answer what you guys are musing about out there. So let's get out there. Okay, Joe says, could the Big Ten pass the SEC as the premier football conference with the additions of USC and UCLA and the hiring of Matt Rule and Luke Fickell? Listen, all of that helps, but you're not going to pass the SEC as the premier college football conference in the country unless you start winning championships decade over decade, right? The runway that the SEC has built itself right now is quite long, and they have been a dominant force at the top end of college football for a long, long time. They also dominate the draft, so as I've said countless times, the SEC is the premier conference in college football. They are the best conference. They have been the best conference at the top. And until somebody beats them in those games, like national championship games or even having more draft picks, then you can't say that you pass them. So, are they going to pass them just because they add these two teams and these two coaches? No. It would take decades of success, in particular winning at the top end and potentially winning national championships for a number of years in a row. All right, next up. This one says, should the Big Ten get rid of divisions when UCLA and USC join? If not, where would you put them division-wise? Listen, I don't think divisions are great in college football, just in general. I think what you get is championship games that don't mean quite as much from a playoff perspective. So I think that we probably will move away with from divisions. Now, having said that, though, I think the interesting part is, do you really want your two best teams out there playing each other and that second best team maybe getting a second loss to that best team? How does that relate to a 6-team at-large berth into an expanded playoff, right? I think those are all questions that you've got to look at, but in general, I don't love divisions in college football. All right, next question. This says, David says, what's the solution to the committee? A revamped BCS? Only computer calculation, something else? I actually think it's a combination, right? If you had a committee or two of 12 people sitting in a room that are debating and ranking teams, plus 2 or 3 computer calculations, what you would get is less statistical variance with one biased input. Right now, this 12-person committee, one person gets biased, one person owns the room, and then all of a sudden the entire ranking can get thrown out of whack, where we need to vary that out, right? And have more inputs into the variable in order to come up with these rankings, which are the end-all in our current system, and even when our current system expands to a 12-team model. All right, last one. AC says, should they be fired? Absolutely not. That's ridiculous. Ohio State fans have got to gain some perspective here. All right, you lost one game. You played pretty good defensively, except for 4 or 5 plays. Ryan Day is 45-5 as a head coach of the Ohio State Buckeyes. 45-5, including being in the top 11 in every single one of those 50 games, in his 50 games. No other coach in the history of our sport can say that. So I think gaining some level of perspective here should be required. And by the way, Ohio State fans, it's not a birthright that you beat Michigan. I know that you felt like it was for the last 2 decades, but that was a Michigan program that was down. Okay, they finished unranked 7 times from 2006 to 2021. Unranked. Meanwhile, Ohio State has been Ohio State for a long time. The difference now is that Michigan has put themselves back on that elite tier. So you've just been joined. It's not a birthright anymore. It's a rivalry. And Ryan Day be fired. Like, give me a break. Have some level of perspective, Buckeye fans, because that type of sentiment isn't doing anybody any good. All right, that's going to do it for questions from Fansville. When we come back, we'll finish things out here on Breaking the Huddle. How about that? Little Michigan-Purdue. Ready to get it kicked off on Saturday night in Indianapolis. We've got really what I think is the premier conference championship game and what has become the premier conference championship game, primetime on Fox. Gus and I will have the call. Allison Williams will be on the sideline. By the way, Allison double dipping this week. Allison's going to be on the sideline in Vegas for USC and Utah, and then is going to jet on over to Indianapolis and will be on the sideline for Michigan and Purdue. Really quickly in that matchup, I just have to touch on a couple of real key things. And Coach Brohm mentioned it in our interview with him during the course of the show. Their ability to get the ball to their playmakers is going to be critical. So Charlie Jones, the wide receiver, Payne Durham, the tight end, which means that the defensive backs for Michigan have a huge task ahead of them. A guy that I want to mention that's getting a lot of playing time as a young player is Will Johnson. Will Johnson is a heck of a player. He was matched up against Marvin Harrison Jr. a little bit last week, so you know that they have a lot of confidence in him. And he hasn't gotten a ton of love nationally yet as one of the premier freshman corners in the country. So Will Johnson, pay attention to him in that matchup against Charlie Jones on the outside. All right, that's going to do it for Breaking the Huddle here today. Conference Championship Game week. I hope you enjoy it. I thoroughly will enjoy it. And again, remember on Fox, 8 p.m. Eastern, as we have Michigan and Purdue going for the Big Ten title. Enjoy your weekend, everybody. This show has been brought to you by Dr. Pepper. It is the one fans deserve.